Yeah. So the recording has been stopped. Now I'll start it again. Oh, it will. Okay, 12:55. It says it started. Okay, that's good. Yeah. Sometimes Teams behaves weirdly. Okay, the stage is yours, Sarah.
Do we want to give a couple of minutes before we make a start, or?
We can give them 4 minutes.
Yeah.
So.
We'll give people a couple of minutes, seeing as how to go with the advertised schedule.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start at 5:30 India time. Yeah, it's 5:30 India time.
Yeah.
Where are you based off, Sarah?
So I'm in the UK, in Yorkshire, so quite close to York, if people are looking it up on a map.
Oh, lovely, lovely. Yeah, so you're in the same time zone as me.
Yeah, it's coming up for 1 o'clock UK time at the moment.
Yeah.
Lunchtime.
Yeah. That is perfect.
Teams does make the world quite a small place, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. Were you there for the MVP summit this year?
Yes, I did manage to make it in person, so that was very nice as well. Yeah.
Oh, it was so short time. I think I didn't even got to meet a lot of people. So I was also there this year, and it's like it's really so much overwhelming. I'd say.
Yeah, it's very busy. I was lucky enough to go last year as well, and I can honestly say that the second year is less overwhelming, but still just as busy.
Yeah. Oh,
was it your first time attending in person?
Yeah, it was my first time, and that's the thing. Like I met so many people, and now I'm marrying up all the names with the LinkedIn profiles and the actual people that I saw, and it's more of people that because my LinkedIn profile I look a little bit different, and people are like, "Oh, okay, you are the same person."
Yes, yeah. I often think that immediately before an event, we should all just update our profile pictures so that we look exactly like our profile pictures. The only problem with that is I'm always exhausted by the time I go to an event. So my profile picture would always be me looking exhausted.
That's true. I don't get a good picture to upload, so that's why I keep it like a 2 years outdated. I get once at 2 years. And that's the reason that like the most funniest thing. One of the guys like I'm usually in touch and he met me in MVP Summit, and he was like, "Oh, you are much taller in person. I thought you will be like a shorter person."
I always get the opposite, being very small. Not being the tallest person in the world, so it's like, oh, you're down there. Yeah. Yes.
It's a sunny Saturday. I guess it's sunny in Dublin. What about you?
No. Definitely not sunny here today. We're very grey and overcast.
Oh.
But not the forecast stormy winds that we were expecting. Yeah. So that's good. Yet. Touch wood, as the saying goes.
Yeah, definitely. I guess we can get started now.
Okay, yes, certainly.
Yeah. I think
so.
Just yeah, sorry. Yeah, you can go ahead. The recording is already going on, so we are good. Thank you so much.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So welcome, everyone. I think I'm about the last session before the closeout panel and the exciting quiz. So I hope you've all had a wonderful conference at this Microsoft Copilot and Viva Days event for 2024. As everyone else has probably done throughout today, definitely in the sessions I've been to, we will thank the sponsors, because without them these sorts of events don't take place. But quite unusually, you also have the chance to win some prizes, so don't miss out on the quiz later. So for this session, we're going to be talking about using Microsoft Purview to manage Viva, Copilot and Loop, these newer tools in Microsoft 365, looking at what coverage is offered across those products. For those people who've not met me before, my name is Sarah Fenner. I am a Microsoft certified trainer, also an MVP, but I spend most of my time talking about the products and how to use them, and focusing on the reality of what they are today, which is why my Viva Explorer persona is the Viva Realist, because my job is to keep it real. I'm also a really big fan of Microsoft Teams, and that is probably the product that I've worked with the most in recent years. And hence I tend to use the moniker Teams Queen, and that's actually my blog as well. If you want to know more about me, please do look me up. The QR code there links to my Linktree, where I will also share a copy of this presentation. And if you're interested in the information that I'm sharing, there's also some additional reference links in the slide notes, so do feel free to go and download those and take advantage of the notes. Okay, so moving on to the content. The premise of this session is to give you a map to the minefield that is managing these new tools from Purview. So we're going to be looking at solving the questions of where the data is stored, which features are applicable across Viva, Loop, and Copilot. So we're looking at Copilot for Microsoft 365 to give it its full name, not in full on the slide because it didn't quite fit. Looking at Purview, for those people who are not familiar with Microsoft Purview, it is a comprehensive set of tools and solutions to help you manage, govern, and protect your data. Okay, so it is now a unification of functionality that was previously Purview in Microsoft Azure, and also the compliance features in Microsoft 365. The key premise of these tools, as we say, is to look at data security, data governance, and also risk management. The features that are applicable to the three products we're looking at today are data lifecycle and records management for retaining content and preserving that content in its current state during that retention period. Data loss prevention to manage sharing of sensitive content, so to block accidental or malicious oversharing, and also to report on sharing of sensitive content that we're responsible for managing. Information protection helps us secure that most sensitive content and also identify it and work out what content we've got that needs to be managed. E-discovery is our admin level search functionality, but also for carrying out investigations. So we can use e-discovery to find information and investigate activity as well. The audit tools allow us to monitor actions that users are taking and review those. And the insider risk management tool, which seems to have lost its clever little picture, so it'll come back in a bit, is all about monitoring especially privileged users and high risk activities. It's not about blocking or managing those activities. It's about identifying when people are misusing the access that they legitimately have to information. And then communication compliance, again, also not about blocking activity, but about monitoring. And this is about monitoring the communication tools that we're giving to our users to make sure those are not being misused, that there's no bullying going on over email or in Viva Engage or Teams, that sort of thing. And we can use those also with these newer products. So whenever I start any kind of compliance conversation with customers, or we're looking at configuring Microsoft Purview in the products, I have a series of questions that I like to ask. Okay, and these questions that I've got on this slide are the ones that we need to be able to answer as a Purview administrator to configure the products. So, for example, I need to know where the tool stores its data. Okay, because that's where I'm going to configure the Purview features to cover. The second thing I need to know is which features are applicable to this product and can be used to control the information where it's stored. We need to find out which of those features to the level we want to use them are included in the licenses we have available. And licensing is obviously quite a complex topic, so I'm going to leave that one to one side for now, but it is one you will need to review quite carefully once you've put in place your requirements. You then need to look at what controls as an organization you want around these Microsoft 365 products and features. And as you establish that, you will establish your requirements of the Purview tools, or where there are gaps. And where there are gaps, are there any additional controls that we need to put in place? Maybe we need to think about security as well as Microsoft Purview. So maybe we need conditional access to limit access to these products in certain scenarios. So it's not just a question of knowing and configuring Microsoft Purview features. It's also a question of understanding what the organization is looking to achieve. Okay, so having gathered that information, you can then move forward with your project of configuring Microsoft Purview. In this presentation, I'm going to help you answer those first two questions. Where is the data stored, and what tools can we use to work with from the Microsoft Purview suite to govern those products? And I'm going to start with Microsoft Viva. Okay, so Microsoft Viva is built on top of Microsoft 365. It inherits lots of controls from those products. So it's important to understand as you look at the different Viva tools you're implementing and that you need to govern, which of those underlying products is called in to play in that particular Viva tool. But across the board, we have the inheritance of settings from Teams, from Exchange, from SharePoint. I'm saying Yammer deliberately. This is not an error. That is effectively the way in which we would refer to the server that powers what is now called Viva Engage, but the service underlying is often still referred to as Yammer. Okay, so hence I'm using that particular term. It's not that this is an old slide deck I haven't updated, promise. And Viva does also work directly with Azure as well. And in that case, the Microsoft 365 Purview functionality doesn't have a huge impact. Okay. So here's a pretty diagram. Hopefully you recognize your product icons. So Viva Connections relies on SharePoint. In an earlier session today, Anouk took you through configuring Viva connections, and everything that was presented in that session was all based on SharePoint. Okay, so when we're thinking about putting in place governance controls, we're governing SharePoint. Viva Goals actually stores its data in Azure. Okay, so that means the standard Microsoft 365 configurations are not going to be very helpful. Viva Learning uses a mix of SharePoint and Azure. And obviously, once we go out to third-party tools, where we're accessing learning materials in those areas, such as LinkedIn Learning, then there's data going to be stored in those environments as well. Okay, so our usage metrics, our completion metrics won't be in the Microsoft 365 space at all. With Viva Insights, the data is in Exchange. With Viva Amplify, all of the campaigns we produce are stored in SharePoint groups designed especially for that campaign, and also in Dataverse, where we're using approvals. The metrics about consumption of those campaigns come then from Exchange and Teams or SharePoint, where that content is consumed. So effectively, Viva Amplify is using SharePoint, Exchange, Teams, and Dataverse. Viva Glint, there isn't a product icon in this one, and the reason for that is the guidance on where the data is stored is not terribly transparent. So Glint has moved to the Microsoft family. From that, I would assume that the data is in Azure. The only guidance on data locations that is available is that the data is stored in the same region as the tenant. Okay, so that indicates to me, reading between the lines, that it's stored in Azure data centers in the region that your organization has their main location set for the tenant, the primary location. Viva Pulse surveys are all stored using the underlying Microsoft Forms architecture. Okay. And again, when we go and look at forms, that content is not terribly transparent as to where the data is stored. So with these newer survey tools, Glint and Pulse, there is still a bit of work that we need from Microsoft to give us that guidance on exactly where that data is stored, especially if you're going to be using it in a highly regulated industry. Answers in Viva uses Viva Engage. Now, I've deliberately said Viva Engage here because then when we go on and look at Viva Engage, we can see what the underlying architecture on that is. And that is a combination of the Yammer service and Azure. So a certain amount of usage metrics are stored in Azure. Now, all of these tools also take advantage of Microsoft Teams because they're all apps that we access via Teams. Okay, but generally speaking, there is no data from those tools stored in Teams, just the fact that the app exists and which users it is available to. Okay. So bearing all that in mind, we can then go on and think about which Purview features apply to these tools. Now, I hope you were paying attention to those icons earlier. The one that was missing is the insider risk tool, which is this one here, the little person with their exclamation mark, our risky user type indication, because insider risk is about managing those users and their risks. Just in case I couldn't remember what all those icons mean, I did a very non-IT person thing. I printed out my slide, so I had a reference for the icons on my desk as I was presenting today. If I start looking down, you know what I'm checking. Okay, so Viva Connections, data stored in SharePoint, and in SharePoint we can govern data lifecycle management and records management. That is this bottom combination of those two, subject to licensing, because of course records management is not in every Microsoft 365 plan. Okay. We also have the information protection, that shield that appears on the top of your taskbar when you're working with a document that has a sensitivity label on it, indicative of information protection. We've got the search functionality of eDiscovery and also the activity tracking of the audit tools. Data loss prevention for accidental oversharing, as well as the insider risk management. So all of those tools cover Viva Connections. Now the one that's missing, it's the little speech marks that you see over here on Viva Learning, that is communication compliance. And technically speaking, Viva Connections doesn't feed into communication compliance. However, I would like to just point out that Viva Connections does include a feed which can highlight activity from Viva Engage, in which case those are covered by communication compliance. Okay, but Viva Connections itself, rather than the information it's surfacing, doesn't use communication, so therefore communication compliance is not relevant. So as we're setting up those products, we're looking at governing the SharePoint locations, the SharePoint sites that are our home sites, that are powering our intranet, our Viva Connections hosted intranet. Okay, so that's how we configure Purview for Viva Connections. Exactly the same as we do for SharePoint, just making sure we're covering those same sites. Viva Goals data is currently not covered at all by Microsoft Purview. Viva Learning is covered by everything. Okay, all of those products I picked out: data lifecycle management, records management, data loss prevention, information protection, eDiscovery, audit, insider risk management, and communication compliance. All of them. Plus, it does all, remember, Viva Learning also stores data in third-party systems. Viva Learning data stored in third-party products is not governed in any way, shape, or form by the features in Microsoft 365. Okay, so you will have to verify what governance controls you have over that data. Viva Insights looks at our activity, yeah, emails, calendar, meetings, that sort of thing, which is all based in Exchange. So all of our Viva Insights Purview activity relates to governing Exchange and the user mailbox. Okay. So if it's all Exchange, why have I not put communication compliance in there? Because we're typically not looking at communications and creating them and generating them from Viva Insights. Viva Insights gives us tools to help manage those communications or interact with those communications, but it doesn't create or store messages. Okay, so it's not a tool that that communication compliance is relevant for. Amplify, Glint and Pulse are currently not covered by Microsoft Purview. Now, Forms, which powers Viva Pulse, is an area of concern for a lot of compliance administrators, and therefore I am hopeful, and I'm not giving anything away here because I don't know of anything, but I'm hopeful that soon we'll start to see the coverage expanding into Forms, and therefore Viva Pulse will also be able to take advantage of that. Okay, Answers in Viva and Viva Engage both are storing their underlying content data in Yammer service, and we can manage messaging and retention and monitor for risk and also find that content in Yammer. So retention policies and records management do come into play. Records management less so, because that would only apply to documents which are stored in the SharePoint sites and connected to from Viva Engage. But retention policies definitely cover conversations, messages inside Viva Engage. Okay. Insider risk management can also pick up signals from Viva Engage, different messages going forward, as can communication compliance. And we can link those up as well. So if inappropriate messaging is being sent, we can use that to inform whether or not there is risk associated with that user perhaps abusing their access. Using e-discovery and audit tools, we can review and monitor activity that is taking place in response to an investigation, such as in relation to insider risk. So the thing to remember is when you're configuring these tools, your data lifecycle management and your records management are targeting files stored in SharePoint. So where that's applicable across all of these tools, Viva Connections, Viva Learning, Viva Insights, Answers, and Viva Engage, then we can use that retention. The retention also applies to messaging, policies across the board, across all types of messaging, Teams and emails and Viva Engage messages. And retention labels can be applied to emails as well. So pretty good coverage from a data lifecycle management perspective. Okay. So I think you can see from that the coverage of Microsoft Viva with Purview is quite significant and actually really quite simple in terms of if you've already adopted Microsoft Purview, you can easily pick up and govern the areas of Viva which are covered because you've already got that governance in place. So it's just a question of making sure you pick up the appropriate SharePoint sites effectively. Okay. Moving on to Microsoft Loop. So Loop really covers a couple of different areas. It's all about these interactive live bits of information, be they components or pages stored in workspaces which you access through the app. Okay, so it's about picking why you want to use Loop. That's the hard thing, but the governance is quite interesting because the first question is, where's the information stored? And it's actually slightly different for components, and for those pages which are part of the workspaces that we access through the app. Okay. Now, this diagram is taken from the official documentation for Microsoft Loop, and it shows where the data is stored. Okay, so we've got a mix of OneDrive for the user who creates the content, SharePoint, and also SharePoint Embedded. Now, SharePoint Embedded has also been referred to as headless SharePoint sites. It basically means they're SharePoint sites from an architectural perspective, but they don't show up as SharePoint sites for us to navigate to, and also not in the admin center either, okay, which is key when we think about Purview. So my Loop components are stored in OneDrive, regardless of where they're created from. If they're created as one individual creating it and sharing it to others via a Teams message or an email message. The exception to that is if the user creates that Loop component inside a Teams channel, either a channel meeting or a channel message directly. Okay. Actually, if you're in a channel meeting, all of your messages are channel messages. So if you're in a Teams team and you're creating a Loop component within that Teams team and a channel message, that is stored in the team SharePoint site. Okay, or the channel SharePoint site, if appropriate. And when we're working in the Loop app, whether we're creating a page or whether we create a component within a page or whether we create a page within a workspace or a new workspace, that's all stored in these embedded SharePoint sites or SharePoint embedded sites. Okay, those SharePoint sites, which technically are SharePoint sites, but from the outside are basically invisible. Oh, hang on 2 seconds. Sarah forgot to do some copying and pasting on her slide. I could pretend that that had built up by animation, but it didn't. I forgot to do some copying and pasting. The Purview tools that apply are the ones that we can apply to SharePoint locations. OneDrive is SharePoint after all. So I've got insider risk management, I've got information protection, I've got e-discovery, I've got audit, I've got not communication compliance, but data lifecycle and records management and data loss prevention. I've not listed data loss prevention on here directly because it tends to come up more from the point of view of the type of content rather than the specific location. Okay, so that's why it's not listed on there. Okay. In OneDrive, I can set up all of my policies to cover a OneDrive. Any policy that covers a user's OneDrive covers the Loop components that they create that go into their OneDrive. Okay. Information protection does apply, but we can't really apply those labels directly to the content. So it's kind of halfway there. I debated for a little while whether I would put that in or not. because it's kind of halfway covered. Okay, and DLP again, halfway covered. We don't get policy tips, but any sensitive information that triggers a DLP policy would trigger on a loop component stored in the OneDrive. Okay, but I can't apply a sensitivity label, as I say, so maybe that one shouldn't actually be there. And the same is exactly true of components in SharePoint. Okay, so any components created from a Teams team message or Teams channel meeting message, those are governed in the same way. And we're putting the protection onto the SharePoint site that underpins that team. So retention policies apply, data loss prevention, e-discovery, audit, insider risk management overview as well. Now, SharePoint embedded only applies if we set the controls to be all sites. Okay, so any policies you've got that cover all SharePoint sites will also pick up those SharePoint embedded sites as well. So slight difference as to how you manage perhaps your configuration of Purview if you're wanting to cover loop. So let's think about Copilot. In case you haven't realized, Copilot is a bit of a big thing. It's bringing a lot of change into the field, and it's probably the strongest advocate for good information governance that I've seen since working with Office 365 from its launch, apart from maybe Delve. Now, the issue with Delve was that most people rebelled against the tool. This time with Copilot, people are not rebelling against the AI tool and saying, it's showing users things it shouldn't, it's broken. People now understand that it's not the tool that's broken, but their configuration in the product isn't necessarily what they want. So with businesses looking to adopt Copilot, we're seeing a huge uptick in the requirement for Microsoft Purview, because the data that we have in our Microsoft 365 environment is easily accessible to our users. So we need to make sure we've got the right protections on that data in order to keep things safe and secure while we benefit from the tool that is Copilot. And so let's deal with those two questions. Where is data stored in relation to Copilot for Microsoft 365? Well, Copilot for Microsoft 365 can get its data from everywhere in Microsoft 365, controlled or trimmed, if you like, to the information the user using Copilot has access to. So Copilot uses data from everywhere. Plus, if you've got any of those plugins active, it will use that data from those locations as well, and we can create custom plugins to that. Okay. Secondly, Copilot stores its data, the interactions in Teams chats. So the prompts I send as a user and the responses I get from Copilot are stored as a conversation. And they're stored in chat. So what we need to think about from a Purview perspective is A, is everything else properly protected in our tenant? Yeah, have we got all of our SharePoint sites? Have we got all of our Exchange mailboxes? Have we got all of our Viva engaged communities all covered? Have we got all of that protection in place? And secondly, how do we govern Teams chat? And do we need to change how we're going to govern Teams chat in order to make sure we're able to govern the Copilot interactions as well? And that's what it boils down to. It boils down to, do I need to change anything I've already got in place? So the Purview features that apply to Copilot. If I think about data lifecycle management and records management, I'm using those features from a Copilot perspective to make sure I'm retaining important information, but we're also clearing out any clutter, clearing out the information that we've held on to that we really don't need. So, the menu from 7 years ago from the staff canteen, probably not needed. The same as all of the pictures from the Christmas party from 40 years ago, probably don't need to keep those anymore, or at least not all of them. Okay, you'd be surprised some of the things I've seen migrated into Microsoft 365 over the years. But we also need to think about how we're going to retain those interactions. A lot of organizations use Purview, use retention policies to clear out chat quite quickly, which encourages users to use the team and the conversations inside the team instead of the chat functionality in Teams. But if we do that, if we clear those quickly, we're also quickly clearing our Copilot interactions. So we need to think about whether we're going to change our chat retention to take account of the Copilot interactions being stored in there. Now that will separate at some point, but at the moment your retention policy for chat covers all of your Copilot interactions. DLP is all about oversharing, controlling sharing, but from a Copilot perspective, what we're thinking about is Copilot's going to be producing a lot of content based on our existing content. So have we configured our DLP policies such that it will cover newly created content? Okay. I mean, that's a good question to ask yourself anyway, but that is the perspective we're thinking about it from a Copilot viewpoint, if you like. With information protection and sensitivity labels, we need to think about that from a perspective of putting that security in place. I mean, the share button in Microsoft 365 is absolutely wonderful, unless you're a SharePoint administrator who has to manage all of those permissions. Then those individual permissions can be a nightmare. And that's where our sensitivity labels can come in very helpful. Copilot uses the extract permission on the documents. Okay, so that's part of the standard co-author role that we can configure in sensitivity labels. So if we have a sensitivity label that doesn't include extract, so if a user has read-only access, for example, to a document controlled by a sensitivity label to manage that access and enforce it, then Copilot will not include that content in its response to that user. Okay. So again, we can review those labels and the permissions and see if we need to change those labels from that perspective. Okay, so anything that you've got marked as highly confidential, you might want to look at your read-only user permissions and see if you need to change them. The other thing to remember is that Copilot applies the sensitivity label to content it creates based on what it derived the source information from. So we want our content to have sensitivity labels on, so that gets applied to new content with that visible marker for our users so that they know what they're protecting. E-discovery and audit and communication compliance tools can all be used to monitor Copilot interactions. Okay, and we can set up configuration specifically limited to Copilot interactions in those tools. So that shows you how you might want to think about Purview and review your configuration differently to help you control Copilot for Microsoft 365. Almost at the end of my allotted time slot, so I just want to highlight something AI specific, not Copilot specific, coming to Microsoft Purview. Now, we do have no information on licensing on this at this point in time. Hopefully we will have around before it starts rolling out, but we're unlikely to get guidance on that until just before the GA rollout at the back end of 2024. This has been pushed back, the public preview has been pushed back from March to May. Okay. The AI hub that is coming to Microsoft Purview is about monitoring your users' use of AI tools, not just Copilot for Microsoft 365, but other non-Microsoft products as well. So if you are adopting a lot of different AI tools, that will be quite useful. Additionally, this week, Microsoft announced that they are bringing a report to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, a usage report for Microsoft Copilot, the Bing Chat Enterprise version as well. So we'll have an understanding of the metrics as to how that is being used by our users. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of Purview across those three products and some things to consider. Whilst we see if anyone wants to raise any questions, I will just finish by thanking the sponsors, organisers, volunteers, and of course my fellow speakers, without whom these sorts of events wouldn't happen. So, but there is one group of people we've forgotten to thank, and that is the audience. Thank you for turning up. I hope you found it useful, and I hope you'll stay on for the quiz.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was really great, and I personally really enjoyed it because that's my area of interest. Yeah. So thank you so much for covering all that. Yeah, a quick note for everyone. So basically, the Q&A piece for Viva Explorers, that's going to be on the track 1 chat. So you need to join the link that I'm dropping on the chat. So, and also the quiz will also follow on the same. So please stay on for the quiz and a Q&A with the Viva Explorers. Thank you so much.
I'm going to assume no one has any questions because I'm supposed to be over on the other track. So if you do have questions, please bring them over to the Q&A with you. Thank you all.
Thank you.